Hey guys, welcome to today's video. We are here to do a little tag video. I love a good tag video. This is the eyeshadow palette tag 5000. I saw Chic Geek created this makeup tag video, so I will have her channel and video listed down below. And she mentioned that she was calling it the eyeshadow palette tag 5000 because there were so many eyeshadow palette tags when she was going through and coming up with her questions and watching other videos. And I've also done other eyeshadow palette tags, but recently, I was looking through my collection. My collection is ever changing, and I thought, oh, I should refilm my eyeshadow palette tag videos. I should update them. And then I saw this fun tag, and I thought this would be a good video to share with you today. Spoiler alert, I am changing some of her questions. The majority are hers, but there are 4 questions that she had that I didn't feel like were relevant to my eyeshadow palette collection, so I'm gonna take those out and replace them with some of my own. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Kelly and I love all things makeup and beauty. I love talking, I love makeup, I love talking about makeup. So if you like to chat about makeup too, I would love to have you subscribe and be part of the K-Bella fam. But why don't we go ahead and jump into the video. Real quick, before we jump in, this look will be coming to you soon. I am in the process of filming with my Lunar Beauty Laura Lee Full Fantasy collab, creating more looks, but a lot of times I get comments about my lip combo or even when I'm editing and filling out my description box and I can't remember it. So it is Anastasia Beverly Hills Lip Liner in Raisin. Then I took BK Beauty's Grace lipstick, put that on top, and the Unearthly Heather Austin Omen lip gloss to round out the look there. But let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Okay, so question number 1 is a palette that you wore on a special occasion. Now, I definitely have several palettes that I have worn for several special occasions, but I was thinking something like a wedding or a family reunion or an event that you were going to. And oftentimes, if I am a guest at a wedding or something like that, and I'm thinking of which palette is easy to travel with, easy to bring, and easy to create a nice color story with, I am gonna go with my Natasha Denona Glam palette. I feel like this is a classic palette, honestly. You can create warm looks if you're looking for warm looks, well, a warm look, but mostly it's cool tone. You can get some cool tone looks, you can go deep and smoky, you can keep it a little bit lighter. I really love the Natasha Denona formula. It really packs a punch. I have to say it probably is my favorite eyeshadow formula, and I just don't have to think here when I'm using this palette. So I went to a friend's wedding. I was a guest at a friend's wedding a couple years ago. I brought this palette. I've also done like date nights with this. It's an easy palette to travel with because you do have a mirror in here, but also it's nice and compact, and I love the shades. So special occasion, had to go with the Glam. The second question I tweaked a little bit. So her question was a palette you love, but it's repetitive. And she talked about one palette that has a repetitive color story, but I actually went a different route and I went a color story that is repetitive in my collection. And I pulled a few palettes that I felt like showed how repetitive this color story is. So first we have the Melt Brunette palette, and you can see here when I open it up, I have tons of browns in my collection. This has like some deep bronze gold. You have almost like a cooler tone brown here, a pinky brown. I feel like this kind of goes, it's on the warmer end of a color story than the Glam palette, but it kind of gives me Glam vibes in that you have a lot of browns. I also have the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette, and if you take out these two, again, you can see very brown. You have those beautiful shimmer shades. Or still yet, digging into my collection, I also pulled out the Sigma Ambiance palette. And again, you have browns in here. You have some that are a little bit more on the rose gold side. You have some warm ones. You have a very bright gold here. It's just a very similar repetitive color story in my collection are these brown neutral shades. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but it is something that I am aware of. I know that I have this repetitive color story in my collection already. So when new palettes come out, I'm constantly asking myself, like, is it going to just be another neutral palette, another warm brown palette, another cool toned neutral palette? Like, is it something unique in my collection, or do I already have these? Okay, now the next palette is a palette that you got your money's worth. And full transparency, the palette that I am about to show you is a palette that I got in PR, but when I was thinking of palettes you got your money's worth, I wanted a different palette for each question, by the way, because there are definitely some palettes, and when I get to them, I could have said these for numerous questions here, but this palette that I'm mentioning, even though it was a palette I got in PR, I'm saying that I got my money's worth because I'm counting the amount of uses that I have with this palette, the amount of times that I've used it. And if I did purchase it, I feel like I would have gotten my money's worth out of the Adept Heather Austin collab, because at first I thought, ooh, this is very different. You have these bright shimmer shades. You have like these very shifty shades. I wasn't familiar with the Adept formula, but Heather is my friend. So Adept and Heather sent this over to me, and I really fell in love with it, and I still use it to this day. I think the shimmers are some of the best, most impactful shimmers that I have in my collection. Typically, I'll just go in with Atlas and any of the shimmer shades. I'll use PaO2 to deepen out the outer crease. I don't dip into these greens much, although I think they are great, but really the shimmers are standout for me, and this is a palette that, although I didn't pay for it, had I paid for it, I feel like I would have gotten my money's worth just from the sheer amount of times that I use it. I have to say, one reason why I've put myself on a low buy, I do have a low buy going on if you don't know, but one of the reasons why I put myself on a low buy and said that I could only purchase 12 eyeshadow palettes this year to equal out to one a month is because I typically buy eyeshadow palettes, use it a couple times or use it for like a week or two, and then I put them in my collection, and like the next best thing, a new shiny eyeshadow palette comes out and I forget about it. But this is one that I reach in for time and time again. I don't have to tell myself to pull it out and use it. I'll be like, oh, I just need a quick, easy look, and I reach into this palette. So for me, it's worth the money, even though I didn't pay for it. The next question is a palette that is an amazing deal, and I don't have a ton of drugstore or affordable palettes in my collection. I do have a few, but I don't have a ton. Typically with eyeshadow palette, I really like my Natasha Denona luxury palettes. But one that sadly you can no longer get it anymore, but I felt like it was an amazing deal, is this BH Cosmetics. It was called Amore in Amalfi. I keep these plastic things, that's what I keep holding, but it just fell out. I felt like this was a great palette because, first of all, if I'm remembering correctly, I want to say it was $18, but you could always get them on sale. So when I purchased it, I want to say it was like 14 something because it was on a sale. You do have 16 eyeshadows. You have a row of browns, a row of rosy shades, a row of oranges, and a row of more of that like mustardy yellow gold shades. You can also mix and match, and I just felt like this is a palette that I would find myself reaching for. The quality is great. It wasn't super expensive, and I can kind of create multiple looks. I can go deeper and darker. I can go lighter. I can get a different color story, and it's beautiful packaging. I've been to the Amalfi Coast. I loved it for that reason, but I really felt like this was a good deal when I purchased it. The next question says palettes you like to combine together, and I think she was thinking of taking maybe like 2 palettes or even a couple palettes that you like to use them in conjunction, almost like sister palettes. And while I typically don't do that, I don't mismatch palettes. I typically stay in one eyeshadow palette, but there is a palette that I will dip into with whatever look I'm creating if I just need like one shade here or there. And it is my Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam eyeshadow palette. For this eyeshadow palette, I typically reach into the shade Tempera. I also, if I need like a little bit of a lighter inner corner, I kind of mix Fairy and Tempera. If I need a brown shade, I can dip into here. If you need a black, I would dip into this Noir shade. But typically when I'm doing an eyeshadow look, I will stick with just one palette. But if the palette doesn't have a shade like Tempera that you can kind of set your eyeshadow primer with, I'll go in with my eyeshadow primer, set with Tempera, use the palette. If I need an inner corner, kind of dip into these two and use it that way. So this palette can kind of be the sister palette to whatever other palette I'm using, but I don't have like 2 palettes that I typically always reach for together. I'm just like a one and done kind of girl, but if I'm mixing palettes, it's gonna be this one. The next question is a large palette that you wish was smaller. Now this is one that I thought about using for the special occasion question, when the first question, a palette you wore on a special occasion, because this is the eyeshadow palette that I wore for my 10-year wedding anniversary, but I wanted to use a different palette each time. So a palette that is larger, that I wish maybe was a little bit smaller, is this Lunar Beauty Nude Prism palette. I love this eyeshadow palette. I think the quality is great. You have a beautiful row of shimmers. You have tons of mattes, like any kind of nude shadow that you could think of, I feel like is in here, but this is a larger palette, and I typically like palettes that are a little bit smaller, and I honestly feel like I love the shimmers. I'm a shimmer girl. I would keep all of the shimmers. If you needed to get rid of a shimmer, I would say either Your Golden Expose or Star Crossed. They are very different, but they kind of have like a similar gold vibe. You could ditch one of those if you needed to, but I was thinking more of the mattes. Like you don't, well, I don't feel like I need all of these deeper shades and all of these lighter shades. While they're not repetitive, they all have different undertones. They are all a little bit different. I feel like it would have been okay to cut out a few. Like you could have cut out one of these shades here. You could have cut out one of these shades here. You could have maybe cut out one of these and just kind of kept less on the matte vibe, if you know what I'm saying. Like cut out one entire row, but mix and match the mattes and just have like 2 rows. I feel like that's something that maybe it would be a little bit better used or utilized in my collection if it was a tiny bit smaller, but I do really love this palette. Okay, so those are all of the questions that Chic Geek came up with that I answered. There were 4 questions, and I'm gonna have her questions listed down below, but there were 4 questions that I didn't feel like were relevant, so I'm gonna let you know what they were. One was a quad you love and wish was a larger palette. I don't have any quads, I don't think. I think the smallest palette I have is a Natasha Denona 5-pan eyeshadow palette, so that didn't make sense for me to answer. One was you love the quality of the eyeshadow but hate the packaging. There isn't one that stands out where I'm like, oh my gosh, I hate the packaging here. So I didn't want to like find one for that question. It also said show your dream palette with singles. While I do still have a small collection of single eyeshadows, I don't really reach for them. So I didn't feel like that would be relevant in my collection. And then one was an eyeshadow palette you wish had a matching face palette. I don't use face palettes a ton, so I don't have a palette that I wish had a matching face palette. So I skipped over those 4 questions, although I will have them listed down below. And I kind of came up with 4 of my own questions that I thought would be fun to answer. One of them is an OG YouTube eyeshadow palette that you still have in your collection. And when I was thinking of this, I'm talking like, think back to the Urban Decay Naked palette days. Now, I did have the original Naked palette. I no longer have that in my collection, but that is one that I could definitely talk about if I still had it in my collection. But that's what I was thinking of. Or the Lorac palettes. Remember when there was the Lorac Pro, the Lorac Pro 2? I no longer have either one of those, but I'm thinking like back to the 2016, 2017 era. Shortly after the Nakeds and the Loracs, Anastasia released her Modern Renaissance palette. This is one, I could have talked about this for a special occasion. I was in a girlfriend's wedding. I wore this many a times as a guest. The one where it talked about matching palettes. You can see I have a huge dip in Tempera here and pan in Vermeer. I would take Tempera, set my eyeshadow primer, reach into Vermeer and put it in the inner corner. I don't reach into this anymore because mine is several years old and I thought the quality just wasn't there anymore. That's why I purchased Soft Glam, to kind of take its place with Tempera and be that sister palette to all of my other palettes. But this definitely was an OG staple YouTube. Like everyone was talking about it. Everybody had this palette. And I know there are still people that use theirs, but I feel like you don't hear about it too much anymore and people have kind of brushed it off to the side. But I still have mine. And even though I don't use it, I'm gonna keep it because I wish I had my Naked palette. I don't wish I had the Lorac palettes, but I wish I had my Naked original because it was such an OG staple YouTube palette that everybody talked about, and that's kind of how I feel about the Modern Renaissance palette. The next one I thought about is an eyeshadow palette that has survived declutters. And the eyeshadow palette that I have that has survived declutters time and time again that I no longer use is the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. Now here's the thing. I was never a huge fan of this formula. I got a ton of fallout with it. I did use it. I used it several times, but I wasn't a huge fan of the formula. Like I said, I got a ton of fallout. A lot of the shades were a little bit deeper than I liked. I like more of a toned down, like very light wash of color. And so I didn't reach for it a ton. This isn't a palette that I felt like was hyped up on YouTube. It wasn't talked about on YouTube. It was definitely not like the Modern Renaissance that everybody had. But the reason why it has survived declutters is because I just really love the packaging. Travel is something that my husband and I do as often as we can. It's kind of slowed down now that we have kids, but we love to travel. We definitely try to go, you know, outside of our comfort zone, travel out of the country whenever we can. And so while I don't have any tie to the eyeshadow formula or the eyeshadows themselves, I really love the packaging of this. I guess it's kind of reverse. There was one question where it was like, you love the shadows but hate the packaging. This is one where I love the packaging but hate the shadows. And so that's kind of why it's survived declutters, and I keep it just because I love it so much. I actually think it would be great if I got a little stand and just kind of left it out. Right now I have it tucked in a drawer with my Modern Renaissance of palettes I don't use, but I almost feel like I should get a little case and just display it because I love it for the packaging. The next one is an eyeshadow palette that you regret buying, but it's still in your collection. For me, it's the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. Now, I just got done saying I love the Natasha Denona formula. That is very true. I do love the formula. I picked up the Metropolis palette because so many people raved about it. It was hyped up here on YouTube, and I thought the color story looked great. But the thing that really made me like bite the bullet and go out and purchase it is because it was going out of stock or like being discontinued, going off of the Natasha Denona website, off of Sephora, off of Ulta, and I thought that I wouldn't be able to get it anymore. But this is a $125, $129 eyeshadow palette, and I spent the money on it and I do not get my money's worth. I don't reach into this. I don't think about it often. This is a palette where I have to tell myself, pull it out, you need to use it. I feel like a lot of these shades that I was excited about kind of give me a similar vibe. There aren't really any lighter shades that I feel like work for me. A lot of these are like deep and grungy, and I just don't get a very light neutral look. I need to pull it out and use it more, but I just ultimately, I regret buying it. I regret buying it, but I'm not gonna get rid of it because it was so expensive. The last question that I came up with is an eyeshadow palette that deserves more love. I don't dislike it. I do like this palette. It just gets neglected sometimes, and I don't know why, because it is a McGrath palette. Again, $125. Maybe that tells me something if these palettes are not, I'm not getting my money's worth with these. Okay, so this is one of the Mothership palettes. It is the, is it the newest one? It's Moonlight Seduction. I know it was one of the recent ones. The packaging, again, I should get a case to have this sitting out as well. The packaging is exquisite, but if for some reason you have not seen this heavy duty eyeshadow palette, this is what it looks like here. It's beautiful. I really enjoy the color story. You have these nice matte shades. You have some beautiful shimmers. You have special shades down here. This is an expensive palette, and I like it. I don't dislike it. I think it's a fun color story. I think the shadows are beautiful. Those special shades are nice and shifty. I don't really have a reason why I don't use it, and it needs more love in my collection. I think this is another one. Maybe if I had it out, well, that's not true because I did have my eyeshadows out and they were displayed and I still didn't use it. I don't know why I don't use it. I don't know. I don't know why I don't use it. I don't know why I don't love it more, but it's beautiful and it does deserve more love. Okay, but that's gonna do it for this video. The eyeshadow palette tag 5000. I thought it was super fun. I will have She Geeks questions down below, and then underneath her questions, I will have the 4 that I came up with to kind of balance the 4 that I didn't feel like were relevant in my collection. So definitely check her out. If you have a channel, I would love for you to tag me if you film this video because I love a good tag video, so I would love to watch it. If you have other tag videos that you are interested in hearing from me, please let me know down below. If you don't have a channel, I still wanna know the answer to these questions. So put it in the comments. I love hearing about different people's preferences and eyeshadow favorites or palettes that they just don't love so much anymore. So that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed before you go. That way I can see you in the next one. Bye.